Amazing how over and over again the songs that are being sung fit real well with what we're talking about. That's how the Lord works those things out. We've been going through the Joseph. Today we're in chapter 37, one of the part that we all know so well. And you stop and think about it. It would be very difficult to be in his position, but thank goodness he was there. You know, as we talk to people, and we all have, you going through your life, have you ever asked somebody what's your dream life? You know, you ask different people their dream life, and it varies in their answers. You know, some people will say they'll give you stuff about their marriage or what they're hoping for, with their children or their health. It could be their wealth, it could be their long life. A lot of things are mentioned. And the question you can ask yourself, what's your dream life? Interesting. What does the Bible say about dream life? And think about it. What about Joseph in his dream life? Did he get his dream life? And let's think about it. He did, but it took a little while to do it. So let's look at it. We're in chapter 37, but before we go into 37, a little bit of a background. If you remember in chapter 25, if you remember when Isaac gives the blessing to Esau and to Jacob, if you remember, he basically, if you remember, is told that obviously the Esau is going to serve him and so on. But look in chapter 25 and 13, you notice what he's then giving. It says, the Lord said to her, this is talking about and notice it says, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 people shall be separated from your body. 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So this is the promise that was given to, obviously, Jacob and Esau before they were even born. Notice then when you get down to chapter 36, which you wonder sometimes why it's included, but you have the descendants of Esau. You remember they met and then split again. In chapter 36, you'll notice a couple of things. In verse 1, notice these are the records of the generations of Esau. And then you go to 30 and 31, you have the chiefs, which would be another term for kings. But notice one of them in verse 30 at the end of it is over the land of Seir, and then 31 over the land of Edom. So Esau has multiplied greatly. They have kings over 2 different lands, talking his descendants, and they have a lot. Go to chapter 37 and verse 1. Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned, in the land of Canaan. Well, did Abraham ever get the land?
No.
Did Isaac?
No.
And Jacob? They're still sojourning. Well, what about Esau? You stop and you think about it. Are they going to get it? Okay. It's interesting talking about the dream life. Sometimes some are getting it. When you think about it, I think when we're wanting the dream life, whether it be with Abraham, whether it be with Isaac, Jacob, or any, is you have to patiently wait. One of the hardest things to do is to patiently wait. And I think about it, when you see that, it's also in Hebrews chapter 11. Let's turn there. I know we're a little short on time today, but let's look in Hebrews chapter 11. It's interesting when you look at it, because I think it's important. Hebrews chapter 11. If you notice in 8 to 10, it's talking about Abraham, and it talks about that he leaves, he obeys, goes to the place to receive an inheritance. He went, not knowing. And notice in verse 9, he lived as an alien in the land of promise. You go down further, they continued to live in the land in 9, dwelled in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise. They never received it. But then you go down a little further, and you see it in verse 13. All these died in faith without receiving the promises, but having seen them and having welcomed them from a distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on earth. For those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. Indeed, they have been thinking of that country which they went out. They would have received the opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country that is a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. So notice, first of all, in our dream life, we have to patiently wait. But are we wanting in this life? Are we wanting it in the next life? And that'd be the first thing. The second thing, go then to chapter 37, we know it well, starting in verse 2. Our dream life is going to be patiently wait, which, by the way, when you think about it, who was living for the line and who was living for the dot between them? Esau was living for the dot today, and Jacob was living for the line for eternity. But notice then the personal integrity, I think, is the second thing in your dream life. Notice in verse 2, Joseph was 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brothers, but he was still a youth. And they notice at the bottom, Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their dad. Okay? You think about it, why would he bring the report back? A lot of people say, well, if they didn't like him, why bring the bad report back? I think personal integrity, was part of it. I think you can get a little more understanding when you go a little further. Go down to chapter 37, notice in verse 12, talking about his personal integrity. And then his brothers went, remember they hate him and they're jealous of him. We find that in 5 to 11, we'll look at later. And then his brothers went and pastured their flocks in Shechem. Remember, Shechem is where they had the massacre. And so they go there, and Israel says to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flocks in Shechem? Come and I'll send you to them. Now, if you're Joseph, you can't even be on friendly terms. Your brothers aren't even friendly terms with you. How do you want to go check on your brothers? Notice Dad's concerned, obviously, if they're at Shechem. He's also concerned because he's had a bad report about, it doesn't say what it was, their behavior or whatever it might be. So now you're going to be sent. How would you like to go back and go check on your brothers who hate you, and maybe have to bring back another bad report? And what would you do? I think it's interesting. So he's honest, but notice then in verse 14 he says he'll go, and notice where he leaves from. So he's sending from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. Okay, now how far is that? How many of you ever even looked at the map?
50 miles.
50 miles. Okay, he got on his motorcycle, right? He just went flying over, right? Now think about it. If you're going to Shechem, by the way, your 10 older brothers, at least they're together. If Shechem wants to do something to get even with the people, it's a whole lot easier to take on a 17-year-old youth by himself, is it not? For any of them. Okay, so he goes 50 miles. In verse 15, he's wandering around in a field, and the man asked him, what are you looking for? He said, I'm looking for my brothers. Please tell me where they're pasturing the flock. Then the man said, they have moved from here and from, I heard they say they were going to go to Dothan. Now where's Dothan? That's 15 more miles to the north and a little bit to the east. Well, could he not have just gone home? His dad said to go to Shechem? Hey, I did. They weren't there. So I think when you look at it, you start thinking about it. Was he honest? Was he obedient? Was he also diligent? What did he do for food? What did he do for all this? His travel. How many days would it take to get there? And you think about it. And all the different things traveling alone, how many things you're facing as a young man on the road like that. So you think about it, the personal integrity. He knows his brothers hate him. He knows that they're jealous of him. But he does it because who asked him to? His father did. How many of us are willing to do things our Father asks us to do, even if it may be at harm for us, our Heavenly Father? So think about it. Do I do what is right no matter the personal cost? So he's patiently waiting. He has personal integrity. Let's go back to verse 3 and 4. There's problems at home. Israel loved Joseph more than all his brothers because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a very, very colored tunic. His brothers saw their father loved him more than all his brothers, and so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. So there's definitely problems at home. You have fatherly favoritism. By the way, did Jacob know what fatherly favoritism was?
Yes.
Who did his father favor? His brother. And who did his mother favor? But how many times do we can see it, but we don't see it maybe in ourselves, but we can see it in others? You also the family discord. In fact, what did Joseph do in verse 3 and 4, his first 17 years? What did he do for his brothers to hate him? Was it his fault that his father showed him favoritism? No. But did they hate him? And I think it's an interesting question you can ask yourself. And so they hated him, but he is still willing to go and check on them. So you think about it, I want to think about it. How do I treat those who are given preferential treatment? You have anybody at work gets preferential treatment? Even family or whatever else? How do we treat them? Are we more like the brothers? Or are we like Joseph? And yet we want to treat people fairly. I think it's interesting. A lot of jealousy will take place. Let's look at the prominence reveal now. I think it's interesting when you think about it, because there's a lot of different ways people will interpret this. And notice in verse 5 down to verse 11, we'll read it and then we'll ask some questions. Then Joseph had a dream. When he was told to his brothers, they hated him even more. But he said, please listen to this dream I have had. For behold, we are binding sheaves in the field, and my sheaf rose up and also stood erect, and behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. Then his brothers, are you actually going to reign over us? Or are you really going to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he still had another dream and related to his brothers, and said, Lo, I have still another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. And related to his father and to his brothers. His father rebuked him and said to him, What is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come down to bow down ourselves before you? And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Now, I want you to think about it. The first question to ask is, where did the revelation come from? From God. How did God so often speak to them in the Old Testament? So are they upset with God's revelation? Don't you think that Reuben thinks he should be? He's the head of the house. Don't you think that Judah thinks he should be? And the rest of them. Okay, so it's interesting. Why did the reactions of the brothers, the jealousy, is because they think they should be. By the way, did the same thing that happened years later with David? Even Samuel was going to pick the wrong one. But what does it say in 1 Chronicles? God looks where? At the heart. So I think it's interesting. They're jealous because they wished that they were the ones the others were bowing down. Why did God? I think when you look at the text and look at the chapters before and the chapters after, you'll see why God didn't choose Reuben. You see why God didn't choose Judah. So you think about it. Well, he shouldn't have told them the dream. Okay? Was God showing it to him? Was God going to use this later in their own lives? If he didn't tell them the dream, could it have been used in their lives later? I think it's important. If God is speaking to you and he's through Scripture, whatever it might be, do you want to tell your people, your friends, your family, when the Lord's showing you something to do? And when you do, should the family support you, or should the family jump on you and say something about it? And by the way, do all of us have spiritual gifts who are Christians? So even within our own families, do certain ones have more prominent gifts so far as their service or whatever, and others have less so far as their service goes? And can we get jealous about that? Who's the one that selects the gift to give you? So I think it's important. We can see a lot of things we can apply. But notice his brother's reactions were wrong, but we can understand it. But it still was wrong. What about the reaction of the dad? How many times did God speak to dreams to the dad? When he was going, you remember, even to the land originally, when he left to get a bride, the dream. When he went with Laban, did God reveal through Laban to let him go? When he went to meet his brother Esau, did God give him a dream to help him? So if anybody understands dreams, it should have been his dad. Now, he kept it in mind, but should he have rebuked him for it? If God's the one saying it, how many times when God says things do we maybe not get behind what God is revealing? But it's interesting when you look at it, what you have. But I think when you look at it, am I working with God's plan or am I working against it? We work with God's plan when? When I'm in agreement with it or I'm in the proper position in it, right? And how many of us do work against His plan when it's not what we want? And I think it's important to really be asking ourselves that question. Am I working with His plan or am I working against it? Because you think about it, it's going to cost Joseph greatly, but that was God's plan. And so I think it's interesting to look at it. So you have these promises revealed, and then notice their poor character is shown. In verse 18 down to 35, you'll see some of the reasons why God didn't choose the others. And you look at it, notice when he's coming, remember he left Shechem and he was going to Dalton, and he's at a great distance. And behold, he's coming closer, they plotted against him to put him to death. Sounds like some integrity, right? Now, why are they wanting to put him to death? What has Joseph done? He gave a bad report.
Looked bad.
And he told them what God had said, showed him what their position is going to be in the future. So notice then it says here, now then come, let us kill him and throw him in one of these pits, and we'll say, a wild beast devoured him, and let us see what becomes of his dreams. Okay, where did the dreams come from? From God? So are they going basically directly against what God said? We don't want that to happen. And that's you think about it, that's a tremendous challenge to go against God, is it not? So you notice the first thing is their desire is they want to get rid of it. And notice then the diversion that you have in 21 and 22. Reuben heard of it. Remember, he's the oldest. He rescued him out of the hands and let's not take his life. Reuben further said to them, shed no blood, throw him in this pit that's in the wilderness, but do not lay hands on him. Then he might rescue him out of their hands to restore him to the Father. Okay, Reuben, basically was diversion, but did he do it really right? As the oldest, could he have said, no, we're not going to do it. We're going to leave him alone and we're going to let him go home after he gives a report. Reuben didn't take the stand that he should have. He also, remember, he had the problem with the stepmom, if you will, earlier that we have. So Reuben shows his character. And notice the discard in verse 23. Reuben's off, and so notice then what happens. So it came about, they stripped him of the tunic, the very color that was on him. I think it's interesting because how many times when you read the very colored tunic, there's a lot of answers. I remember I read some of them said, well, it's going to be a real long tunic, that one you don't wear to work in and stuff. They give a lot of answers. Well, he just traveled 65 miles in it. And I'm sure it was just nice cold weather where you needed a long coat, right? The main thing to recognize, it was something that truly was separated him, a gift from the Father that separated. But I think we so often try to come up with what it exactly was, and we just need to perhaps leave it alone. But notice he was wearing it. Again, I wonder about why he would be wearing it when he knows it's a problem, but he was wearing it. And so they take it off of him, they throw him in a pit, just like Reuben had told him to. And remember, Reuben's going to bring him and save him. In 25, notice their conscience is really bothering them, discarded. They sat down to eat a meal. Doesn't bother them at all, does it? That he's sitting in a pit. And look and behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites. Remember that Ishmaelites, Mennonites are both descendants also from Abraham. Nomadic people coming from Gilead with their camels bearing aromatic gum and palm and myrrh on their way to bring them down to Egypt. Judah, the natural leader, basically said to them, what profit is for us to kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh, and his brothers listen. Now remember, Reuben wasn't there, so Judah now takes the leadership role and says, hey, let's don't kill him. Let's just sell him. We'll get rid of him. Just discard him. Remember, we don't care about the dream. We don't care about what God has said. And that's what they do. And then they noticed then some Midianites, traders, passed by, so they pulled him up and lifted Joseph out of the pit, sold him the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. 30 shekels is what you have an adult slave, and this is 20. So thus they brought Joseph into Egypt. So you think about it, what do they think about it? They discarded. You think about it, the poor character. Should Reuben have stood up? You know, Simeon and Levi have already shown their character earlier. You see Judah and his character not doing what is right. So you can see then why God had the dream go to Joseph, because of his integrity versus his older brothers. But they don't see it. How many times do you and I not see our own character and our own character flaws? Did they think they were doing anything wrong? Had they seen deception all their life? And they thought, well, Dad's wrong for what he did, and this guy's wrong for what he did, and hey, we're fine with what we're doing. And notice then the deception. So since they've got rid of him, what are you going to tell Dad when you come home? So notice then when Reuben returns in 29, he was not there. He tore his clothes, because obviously being the oldest, responsible. He didn't take the stand initially, so now what's he going to do? He turned to his brothers. The boy is not there. As for me, where am I to go? So they took Joseph's tunic, slaughtered a male goat, and dipped the tunic in the blood. And then they sent the very coat tunic and brought it to their father and said, we have found this. Please examine it to see whether it is. Notice what? It is your son's or not. You know, he was told to check on his brothers, and he goes. But do they call it, is it our brothers?
No.
No, it's just your sons. The hatred is still there. So notice, though, the deception. And so obviously when they see it, but again, does Jacob also have the dream? Was he told the dream about Joseph? Was he told that they were going to bow down to him? So could he be dead? Are you going to believe God's promise? Or are you going to look at circumstantial evidence? And what do most of us do? Most of us look at what? Circumstantial evidence. And it looks overwhelming. If you and I are in that position, what would we do? We'd see the tunic. Yes, that's the one I gave him. We'd see the blood, and we'd make the assumption. We didn't have DNA. We couldn't test to see what kind of DNA it was. We just make the assumption it's his, he's dead. So I think interesting the deception that you have. So Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth on his loins, and mourned for his son many days. 35, I don't know if how many of you ever noticed that verse before. That all his sons and all his what? We only are told one daughter in Scripture, Diana, and only because of what took place. He had other daughters, never mentioned in Scripture. So he obviously, the family was quite large, not only 12 sons, but he had more than one daughter. And they tried to obviously comfort him, but it didn't work. So think about it, just the poor character that's shown. Does my poor character hurt others? Did Reuben's hurt him? Did Judas taking the lead hurt him? Did the other 9 following hurt him? Could the other 9 have told Judah, no, we're not doing that? Notice then, all of them had the choices to make. And the same thing happens with any bullying or anything that happens in school or doing anything. How many times do people follow? Rather than take the stand, they follow. So notice also, does my character reveal why I've been overlooked? Does the passage reveal why God chose Joseph and didn't choose them? And so, you think about it, because when you get to Potiphar's household, what would Judah have done when he was tempted? What would Reuben have done when he was tempted? Based on Scripture, I think we know what they would have done. It's interesting, but notice God's still in charge. Notice in 36. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer, the captain of the bodyguard. It's important then, because why did he just happen to get bought by Potiphar? Because that's going to be a very important part later in the story. And you get in chapter verse 4 of the next passage, that's 13 years later. So this is a long period of time that takes place. let's think about it when you look at it, because we know the stories very well, but just think about it, some of the applications talking about the dream life, living by faith. How many of us are living for the line, and how many of us are living for the dot? You know, Joseph, you know, God, you meant it for harm, God meant it for good. How many years did he live in Egypt, and how many years did he live in his homeland? How old was he when he died?
110.
110. And notice he wanted to go back, because he said, bring my bones back. But he noticed God's life, dream life for him was not. And he saved his nation because of it. Personal integrity. Do I have what is right no matter, do I do what's right no matter what the personal costs are? Joseph did, that's why he was the right selection. His brothers didn't, that's why they, one of the reasons why, humanly speaking, why they were overlooked. The prominence is revealed in, am I working with God's plan or against it? How many of you ever worked against God's plan? You know, how well does it work? You ever been spanked before? You know, we can work with God's plan. I suggest that we do, even if it means somebody else is going to have the position that we think or wish we had. It's best to work with God's plan and not against it. Does my poor character hurt others or work on me? The brothers are going to make, remember I told you before, you can see development. As you continue in the story, Judah's going to make changes. They're going to make changes. And we have to let God make the change. Joseph wasn't there to help him with the change. But God was there to help him with the change. Now, obviously, last one, God's still in control. He put it in Potiphar's house, even though, I imagine, if you were Joseph, how would you be feeling right about now? How strong would that dream be for you to hang on to? Because what else do you have? Are you going to believe the promise God gave you, or are you going to look strictly at circumstance?